The black surface of planet Arnos stretched out like a frozen sea of fire. Sharp ridges of cooled lava rose from the ground, and long cracks glowed faintly where the heat below still pushed upward. To most eyes, the planet looked like a dangerous wasteland, but to the human exploration team, it was something more. Commander Dan stood at the edge of a rocky cliff, his visor reflecting the red light of the nearest star. Behind him, the landing shuttle rested on the hardened lava field, its silver hull marked with scratches from their rough descent. The air shimmered from the heat, and the ground trembled now and then as if the world itself was breathing. Dan's team worked quickly to set up camp. Tomasz, the engineer, adjusted the solar panels and secured energy lines while Myra, the linguist and researcher, checked the scanners for signs of buried structures. Their mission was simple on paper but risky in truth. The Alliance Council had sent them to confirm reports of unusual readings beneath the largest volcano on the planet. The scans from orbit had shown hints of hollow chambers far below the surface. "It looks dead on the outside," Tomasz said as he tightened a bolt on the energy grid, sweat dripping down his face, "but this planet is alive under the skin. I can feel it." Myra kept her eyes on the scanner, her brow furrowing. "Alive, yes, but maybe more than just the volcano. Look at this." She turned the screen toward Dan. Bright lines shaped like curves and angles spread across the display. They were too even, too perfect to be natural. "Structures," Dan said quietly. His voice carried weight, not of surprise but of recognition. "Someone built something down there." The idea was unsettling. No record showed any settlement or colony on Arnos. The planet was marked long ago as unstable and dangerous, avoided by traders and miners alike. Yet now, before their eyes, was proof that someone had been here, someone who had carved into the depths of a volcano and left behind more than stone. The team worked until the sky turned darker, though the horizon still glowed faintly with fire from distant vents. Their camp lights cast long shadows as they gathered near the shuttle to eat their ration packs. The silence of the planet pressed in on them, broken only by the crack of cooling rocks and the low growl of the volcano deep below. Myra broke the silence first. "Do you think it was humans?" Dan shook his head. "Not likely. If humans ever came here, we would have records. This feels older. Much older. Then why build under a volcano?" Tomasz asked, his mouth full of food. "If I were making a city or a base, I wouldn't choose the most dangerous place around." "That's exactly why," Myra replied. Her eyes glimmered with curiosity. "If you wanted to hide something important, you would put it where no one would dare to look. A volcano is the perfect guardian." Dan listened but said nothing more. He had learned long ago that answers rarely came on the first day of a mission. Instead, he focused on the horizon, where the mountain of fire rose high into the sky. Its peak smoked against the stars, a warning that the planet was never at rest. That night, while the others rested inside the shuttle, Dan kept watch outside. The heat in the air made the stars flicker, and the ground shook again, stronger this time. He placed a gloved hand on the dark stone beneath his boots. It pulsed faintly with warmth, like the heartbeat of a giant sleeping just under the surface. In the morning, the team began their first survey near the base of the volcano. The slopes were steep, the ground fractured, and every step threatened to send rocks tumbling down. Tomasz carried heavy instruments, grumbling with each step, while Myra carried her smaller scanner and took samples of the strange glassy soil. Hours passed before Tomasz gave a sudden shout. "Commander! Over here!" Dan rushed over to find him kneeling beside a half-buried slab of stone. Unlike the rough volcanic rock around it, this slab was smooth and marked with lines that curved in a pattern. With effort, they cleared the dirt and lava crust to reveal more of it. Symbols were carved into the surface, strange shapes that twisted in circles and sharp points. Myra knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the carvings without touching. "This is not natural. These are words." A language. Can you read it? Dan asked. Not yet, she admitted, her eyes shining with excitement. But I will. It may take time. Dan ordered Tomasz to mark the location and scan the surrounding area. Soon the scanner revealed that the slab was only the top of a much larger structure buried under the hardened lava. The pattern stretched downward, as if a hidden doorway lay just beneath their feet. The team returned to camp that evening with tired bodies but restless minds. They had come expecting stone and magma, but instead they had found language and design. Something was waiting beneath the volcano, and it had been hidden for a reason. That night, as the ground rumbled once more, Dan stood outside again. He looked toward the mountain, its peak glowing faint red against the night. For the first time, he felt not like an explorer but like an intruder. And far below, deeper than their scanners could yet reach, something ancient waited in silence. The next morning began with the steady hum of Tomasz's drilling equipment. The slab they had uncovered was only the beginning, and Dan wanted more revealed before the ground grew unstable. The planet's tremors had been stronger during the night, and each one reminded them that time was not on their side. Dust and ash filled the air as Tomasz worked, cutting away at the cooled lava that had sealed the stone structure. Myra stood nearby, her scanner in hand, tracing every line of the markings as more of them appeared. "These symbols repeat," she said with growing excitement. "It looks like a pattern of warnings. See these circles? They mean danger or keep out. But here these lines suggest something else. A passage. Maybe even a door." Dan crouched down beside her. His eyes followed the symbols, trying to understand. "You're saying this is not just a wall. It's an entrance?" Myra nodded. "Yes. Whoever built this did not want it to be easy to find. The lava must have covered it long ago, but the design shows a way in." Tomasz wiped sweat from his forehead and leaned against his tool. "A door under a volcano. Sounds like the worst place to step into. If we open it, who knows what kind of heat or gas will come out." Dan placed a hand on the stone. It was warm but not burning. The rock around it was rough, yet the slab itself felt smoother, almost like it had been made to last forever. "We'll be careful. But we came here to uncover the truth. If this is a tomb, or a base, or something else, then we need to know." By midday, more of the slab had been revealed. It stretched wider than any of them expected, its surface covered in rows of carvings. Myra sat with her tablet, slowly translating the repeating patterns. Though the language was alien, certain shapes connected to meanings she recognized from other old star scripts. At last she looked up, her face pale but filled with awe. "It says this place was built to guard something. To guard and to warn." "Guard what?" Tomasz asked. She hesitated. "It doesn't say clearly. But there are words for enemy, silence, and sleep. It feels like they locked something inside." The ground shuddered under their boots, reminding them that the volcano was very much alive. Dan looked at the sky, where thin trails of smoke drifted upward from the mountain's peak. If they locked something away, maybe they hoped no one would ever find it. Myra lowered her voice. "But we already have." Despite Tomasz's warnings, they continued working into the evening. With careful effort, Tomasz found a series of seams along the lower edge of the slab. The lines were too perfect to be natural. He tapped them with a tool, and a hollow sound echoed back. "This is it," he said with a mix of pride and worry. "There's a chamber on the other side." Dan ordered them to prepare lights, masks, and safety gear. He knew the risk but also knew they could not turn back now. "We open it slowly. We check the air before stepping in. If there is danger, we stop." As the last of the lava rock was cleared, Tomasz found a raised mark in the center of the slab. It looked like a handprint, but larger, shaped for a being not quite human. Without thinking, he placed his own gloved hand against it. The ground trembled harder, and the carvings lit faintly with a soft blue glow. Myra gasped. You activated something. Tomasz jumped back, holding up his hands. I didn't mean to. It just before he could finish, the stone slab shifted. A low grinding echoed through the valley as the door slowly sank inward. Ash fell from above, and the hot air hissed as if the volcano itself had been disturbed. Behind the slab lay a dark passage leading downward. The air that escaped was heavy but breathable. Dan tested it with the sensor, then gave a short nod. Safe enough for now. Keep your masks on just in case. They stood at the edge of the newly revealed tunnel, their lights piercing the blackness. The walls were made of the same smooth stone, covered in glowing lines that pulsed faintly like veins of light. It was not the work of simple tools but of advanced hands that had shaped this place to endure centuries. Someone wanted this hidden, Myra whispered. And yet they left a way in. It feels like they knew one day others would come. Dan stepped forward first, his voice steady. Then we'll find out what they left behind. The team entered the passage one by one. Their footsteps echoed softly against the stone floor. The deeper they went, the cooler the air became, though the heat of the volcano pulsed faintly through the walls. The tunnel sloped downward in a gentle curve, leading them further beneath the mountain. After several minutes, they reached a chamber where the ceiling rose high above them. Strange shapes were carved into the walls, figures of tall beings with elongated arms and eyes that glowed in the dim light. The carvings showed battles, with these beings standing alongside others that looked human. Myra stood frozen, staring at the images. This shows humans. Look at the armor, the faces. They are not exact, but close enough. This is impossible. Dan studied the carvings as well. The figures of humans held weapons, standing beside the alien figures as if they were allies. Are you saying humans were here before? Myra shook her head. Not here maybe. But these carvings suggest that whoever built this knew of humans, long ago. This could change everything we thought we knew about our history. Tomasz shifted uncomfortably, his light sweeping across the carvings. If they knew humans, why hide this place? And what exactly are we walking into? The chamber grew silent again, except for the faint hum that seemed to come from deep within the walls. It was not the sound of the volcano but something else, an energy still alive after countless years. Dan lifted his light toward another passage that stretched beyond the chamber. We've only just stepped inside. There's more ahead. Whatever they wanted to protect, it's deeper. And we are going to find it? As they prepared to move forward, the ground trembled once more, harder than before. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the glow in the carvings pulsed brighter, almost like a heartbeat. Myra glanced at Dan, her eyes filled with both fear and wonder. It feels like the tomb itself knows we are here. Dan tightened his grip on his light and nodded. Then we move carefully. The forgotten secrets of this place are waiting for us. The team pressed onward, deeper into the hidden entrance of the volcano, unaware that their discovery had only just begun and that every step was waking something long silent. The tunnel sloped deeper, carrying the team away from the light of the surface and into the silence of the mountain. Their boots pressed against smooth stone, worn as if countless steps had once traveled the same path. The walls glowed faintly with blue lines that pulsed in rhythm, like veins carrying energy through the tomb. Commander Dan walked at the front, his lamp sweeping over carvings etched into the stone. Myra stayed close behind, her scanner in hand, recording every detail, while Tomasz followed with his heavy gear, muttering about the weight on his back. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. It grew cooler, touched with a strange metallic taste. Yet it was not stale. Instead, it carried a faint hum, as though the stone itself was alive with hidden power. After several minutes of silence, Myra spoke. This place isn't just carved. It's alive with energy. These walls, they're not simple stone. They're fused with technology. Tomasz frowned, shining his light closer. Technology that still works after who knows how many years. I can't even keep a generator running for 10 without fixing it. Dan's voice was calm but steady. Whoever built this wanted it to last. And it has. Which means what lies ahead was important enough to protect for centuries, maybe longer. They soon entered another chamber. This one was larger, its ceiling rising high above them, supported by carved pillars shaped like twisting flames. The walls displayed more murals, telling stories in pictures rather than words. Myra studied them closely, her heart racing. These show battles, she whispered. Here figures that look like humans fighting alongside these tall beings with glowing eyes. And here the enemy. Shapes with jagged bodies, like shadows with claws. The same enemy repeats again and again. Dan moved closer, his eyes narrowing. Are you saying these beings fought wars with humans? Myra nodded slowly. That's what the carvings suggest. It means humans may have been part of something far greater than our own history remembers. Tomasz let out a nervous laugh. So humanity had allies long before we ever left Earth? If that's true, why did we forget? Why is there no record of this? No one answered. The silence of the chamber pressed on them, heavy with mystery. At the far end, another passage led downward. The walls of this tunnel were brighter, lined with glowing symbols that seemed to react as they passed. Each step forward made the symbols flicker, almost like they were waking from a long sleep. This place knows we are here, Myra said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Dan didn't respond. He kept moving forward, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm, though he doubted it would help against whatever forces had built this tomb. As they descended further, the tunnel widened until it opened into a circular hall. In the center rose a tall pedestal, and above it floated a sphere of faint light. It spun slowly, casting gentle rays across the chamber. Tomasz whistled under his breath. That's not natural. Myra approached carefully, her eyes fixed on the sphere. It's a memory core. I've seen fragments of technology like this in other ruins, but never intact. If I can connect my scanner, it may reveal what this place holds. Dan gave a short nod. Do it. But be quick. Myra knelt, attaching her scanner to the pedestal. At first, nothing happened. Then the sphere pulsed, sending a wave of light through the room. The carvings on the walls lit up, glowing brighter than before. A projection formed in the air above them, a vision of tall alien figures standing beside human soldiers. The humans wore armor unlike any in modern history, wielding blades and weapons of strange design. Together, they faced monstrous beings of shadow and fire, their forms twisted and terrible. The image shifted, showing the tall aliens constructing great chambers beneath mountains, sealing them with symbols of warning. A voice echoed faintly through the hall, deep and melodic, though its words were in a language long forgotten. Myra's eyes widened. This proves it. These builders knew humanity. They fought beside us. And this tomb, it was made to protect something, or someone, from the enemy. Dan studied the vision until it faded back into the sphere. His jaw tightened. If this is true, then humanity's history is incomplete. We were part of wars beyond our world, and we forgot. Maybe on purpose, maybe not. But now we've found the proof. The sphere dimmed, and the room returned to silence. The hum in the walls grew louder, as though the tomb was fully awake now. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and cracks ran across the floor. Tomasz steadied himself against a pillar. That wasn't the volcano. That was something else. Dan's voice was sharp. We move. There's more ahead, and we need to see it before this place decides to close on us. They pressed forward into yet another descending passage. This one was narrower, the walls etched with spirals of light. The tunnel twisted and turned until they reached a final doorway, its surface sealed with the symbol of two hands joined together. Myra studied it, her brow furrowed. This is not just decoration. It's a lock. A lock that requires touch. Dan stepped forward, placing his hand against the mark. The stone was cold at first, then warmed beneath his palm. Slowly, the door slid open with a low rumble, revealing darkness beyond. The team raised their lamps and stepped inside. What they saw froze them in place. The chamber was vast, stretching wider than any they had entered. Along the walls stood towering figures, statues at first glance, but their shapes were too detailed, too precise. They looked like warriors of stone, armored and armed, yet their surfaces glimmered faintly as if made of something more than rock. Tomasz whispered, "They look like guardians." Myra nodded, her voice trembling. "Not statues. Machines. Protectors, waiting." Dan's hand tightened on his weapon. The silence of the chamber was heavy, broken only by the faint echo of their breaths. They had descended into the heart of the tomb, and whatever was hidden here was not just meant to be remembered, it was meant to be defended. For the first time since entering the volcano, Dan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. He looked at the rows of silent guardians and knew they had only awakened the beginning. The chamber stretched out before them like a silent army frozen in time. Dozens of towering figures stood along the walls, their armor gleaming faintly under the glow of the lines that ran through the stone. Each figure held a long weapon shaped like both a staff and a blade, and their eyes, smooth glass orbs, remained dark and lifeless. Commander Dan raised his lamp higher, the beam sweeping across the ranks of guardians. "These aren't statues," he said in a low voice. "They were built to defend this place." Tomasz swallowed hard. If they were meant to defend, what happens if they still can? Myra walked slowly toward one of the figures, her scanner in hand. The closer she came, the more she realized the truth. Their bodies were not simple stone. The surface shimmered faintly like metal fused with crystal, and small lines ran across them like veins filled with energy. "They're machines," she whispered. "But not machines like ours. These are alive in their own way. They've been waiting." Dan motioned for her to stay back. "Waiting for what?" Before she could answer, the ground trembled. A faint hum spread through the chamber, rising from the floor beneath their boots. The walls pulsed with blue light, brighter than before, and the air vibrated as if the tomb itself was breathing. Tomasz took a step back, his voice tense. "I don't like this. Something's starting up." The guardian stirred. At first, it was only the smallest movements, the twitch of a hand, the tilt of a head. Then, slowly, their eyes lit with a pale blue glow. One by one, the towering figures turned their heads toward the humans. Dan's instincts screamed danger. "Get behind me," he ordered, drawing his sidearm. The sound of grinding filled the air as the guardians stepped down from their alcoves, their heavy feet striking the floor in unison. The chamber echoed with the weight of their march. Weapons shifted, raised, and pointed toward the small human team. "They think we're intruders," Tomasz said, panic in his voice. Dan kept his weapon steady, though he knew a single shot would be useless. "Hold your ground. Do not fire unless I give the order." The guardians closed in, forming a half circle around them. The glow in their eyes pulsed like a warning. One of the figures stepped forward, its weapon raised high, and the others followed. Myra suddenly shouted, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Stop!" She raised her tablet, scrolling quickly through the translations she had been working on. Her eyes darted across the patterns of words, searching for the right ones. "They don't just guard. They recognize allies through language. If I can say the words carved on the entrance, maybe they will understand." Dan kept his eyes on the advancing figures. "Then say them now." Her hands shook as she read aloud in the strange language, her voice uncertain but growing stronger with each word. The syllables were sharp and flowing, alien yet powerful. The guardians froze. Their weapons lowered slightly, and the glow in their eyes flickered. Keep going. Tomasz urged, his voice trembling. Myra continued, speaking the lines carved into the slab outside the tomb. Her voice steadied as she repeated the words, warnings, promises, and alliances long forgotten. The chamber seemed to respond, the walls glowing brighter, the hum softening, as if the tomb itself recognized the language. The lead guardian stopped only a few steps from Dan. Its massive head tilted down, glowing eyes fixed on Myra. For a long moment, silence held the chamber. Then the guardian lowered its weapon and knelt, the sound of metal and stone grinding against the floor. One by one, the others followed. Dozens of guardians bowed, their weapons pressed to the ground, their glowing eyes dimming to a softer light. Dan slowly lowered his weapon, his voice filled with disbelief. They're not attacking us. They're acknowledging us. Myra's breath trembled as she lowered her tablet. They recognize the words. They recognize us. Humans. We're not intruders. We're allies. Tomasz stared at the kneeling machines. Allies. To what? To who? Before anyone could answer, the pedestal at the far end of the chamber lit up. A circle of symbols appeared on the floor, glowing bright gold. From it rose a new projection, an image of a tall alien figure, cloaked and crowned, with eyes that shone like stars. The voice that followed was clear and strong, though still in the ancient language. Myra listened carefully, translating as quickly as she could. It says, "To those who return, we welcome you. You are the heirs of the Alliance. The Guardians are yours to command. Protect what we left behind, for the enemy still waits." Dan stared at the vision until it faded into sparks of light. His voice was heavy with realization. This tomb wasn't meant to keep people out. It was meant to wait for us. For humans. The Guardians rose again, but this time they did not advance with weapons raised. Instead, they stepped back into formation, their glowing eyes steady, watching but not threatening. Myra's hands trembled as she clutched her tablet. If this is true, then humanity was part of something much larger long ago. We were meant to return here. Tomasz shook his head slowly. But why hide it under a volcano? Why bury it so deep no one could find it? Dan looked around the chamber, his voice quiet. Because whatever they were protecting, it was too important to risk falling into the wrong hands. They wanted to make sure only the right ones would ever awaken it. The Guardians stood silently, their presence both comforting and unnerving. It felt as if the team had gained protectors, yet the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on their shoulders. Myra looked at Dan, her voice barely above a whisper. If these Guardians obey us, then what exactly are we protecting? What lies deeper than this? Dan's eyes moved toward the sealed passage at the far end of the chamber. It was marked with even more complex symbols, glowing faintly as if aware of their presence. He felt the answer was waiting just beyond that door. But before he could speak, the ground shook violently, stronger than before. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the glow in the walls pulsed like a heartbeat racing faster. Tomasz grabbed the scanner, his face pale. That wasn't just the volcano. Something else is moving down here. Dan steadied himself, his voice firm despite the shaking ground. Then we keep going. We didn't come all this way to turn back now. The Guardians shifted, their heads turning as one toward the sealed passage. Their weapons hummed faintly, as if readying themselves. For the first time, Dan felt as though the machines were not just protecting the tomb, they were preparing for what lay ahead. And deep beneath the volcano, the secret that had been locked away for centuries was waking. The violent shaking slowly faded, leaving the chamber heavy with silence once again. Dust hung in the air like a thin mist, and the glow of the walls flickered before stabilizing. The Guardians stood tall, their glowing eyes fixed on the sealed passage at the far end of the hall. It was as if they were waiting for the humans to continue forward. Commander Dan's gaze followed theirs. The sealed passage was covered in thick carvings that glowed faint blue, like a heartbeat pulsing through the stone. "That's our next step," he said firmly. Tomasz frowned, his hand tightening around his scanner. "Do we even know what's behind that door? For all we know, it could be a prison. Something locked away for a reason." Myra looked down at her tablet, scrolling through the translations she had managed so far. Her voice trembled with both fear and excitement. "It's not a prison. At least, not in the way you think. The words I've read so far, they speak of rest, protection, and return. Whatever is sealed beyond this door was meant to survive until the right time." Dan gave her a sharp look. "And what tells you we're the right time?" Myra hesitated, then gestured toward the guardians who still stood silently around them. "Because they didn't destroy us. They bowed to us. That means something." The silence stretched until Dan finally nodded. "Then we open it? But carefully." Tomasz muttered under his breath, but he set to work. He examined the carvings, tracing his fingers along the grooves. At the center of the sealed passage was a mark: two joined hands, just like the symbol they had seen before. "This again," Tomasz said. "It's like a key." Dan stepped forward, placing his hand against the mark. Once again, warmth spread beneath his palm. The carvings lit up, glowing brighter, until the entire doorway shimmered with light. With a deep rumble, the stone split down the middle and slid open, revealing darkness beyond. A cool wind swept out, carrying with it the scent of age and stillness. The guardians did not move, but their eyes glowed brighter as if acknowledging the door's opening. Dan raised his lamp, leading the way into the passage. Myra and Tomasz followed close behind, their footsteps echoing. The walls here were different, less decorated, smoother, almost reverent. After several minutes, the passage opened into a vast chamber unlike any they had seen before. At its center stood a colossal sarcophagus, resting on a raised platform carved with countless symbols. The structure was not rough stone but smooth crystal, clear enough to see the figure inside. Myra gasped, her voice breaking. It's not empty." Within the crystal lay a tall alien woman, her form preserved as though she had only just fallen asleep. Her features were delicate but powerful, her skin pale with a faint glow beneath it. She wore armor that shimmered faintly in the light, marked with the same symbols they had seen on the walls. Her hands were crossed over her chest, and a crown-like band rested on her brow. She looked peaceful, untouched by time. Tomasz whispered, "She's alive." Or was alive. Myra shook her head. "No, look closer. The symbols here, they're not about death. They're about waiting. She's in stasis, not gone. She was preserved." Dan's chest tightened as he stared at the figure. "A queen," he said softly. "They built this tomb not to bury her, but to protect her." Around the sarcophagus, more carvings told the story. Myra translated as her eyes traced the lines. She led her people in the war against the shadow enemy. When the battle was lost, she chose not to fall. Instead, she was sealed away here, to wait until her allies' humans would return. Dan's hand curled into a fist. "They built this whole place to keep her safe." A sudden hum filled the chamber, and the platform beneath the sarcophagus lit with golden light. A projection rose above it, the same queen, alive and radiant, speaking in the ancient tongue. Her eyes seemed to look directly at them. Myra's heart raced as she translated. She says, "To those who find me, you are the children of our allies. I entrust you with our legacy. Protect what remains, for the enemy will rise again. Only together can the alliance return." The projection faded, leaving only the silent figure inside the crystal. For a long time, none of them spoke. Finally, Tomasz broke the silence. "So what now? Do we wake her? Do we leave her here? What if she's dangerous?" Myra shook her head. She's not dangerous to us. Everything here shows humans were her allies. This tomb was built for us to find her. Dan looked at the guardians who stood at the chamber's edge. Their glowing eyes followed his every move, yet they made no threat. He felt the weight of the Queen's presence pressing on him, like a responsibility he had not asked for but could not refuse. He turned back to Myra and Tomasz. We don't wake her yet. Not until we understand more. But one thing is clear, this isn't just an archaeological find. This is a trust. Humanity has been chosen to guard her legacy. The ground rumbled again, this time stronger. The lights in the chamber flickered, and small pieces of dust fell from the ceiling. Tomasz glanced upward nervously. That didn't feel like a natural quake. Myra's scanner beeped sharply, and her eyes widened as she read the data. Commander, there's movement above us. Something entered the planet's orbit. Dan's expression hardened. A ship? Yes. More than one, Myra said. And not human. The tremors grew stronger, echoing through the mountain. The Guardians straightened, their weapons humming faintly as if responding to the threat. Their glowing eyes locked onto the entrance, ready to move. Dan's hand tightened around his weapon, though he knew it would be nothing compared to the Guardians. So it begins, he muttered. The enemy they warned us about, they're here. He turned to his team, his voice firm. We came here as explorers. But now we stand as protectors. Whatever happens next, we defend this tomb. We defend her. Myra's eyes flicked back to the sarcophagus, where the alien queen rested silently within the crystal. Maybe this is why the tomb waited for us. Not to discover her, but to fight for her. The ground shook again, and distant thunder echoed through the tunnels. The enemy had arrived, and the Guardians stirred to life, ready for battle. Dan stood tall, his voice steady as he looked upon the army of machines now awakening at their side. Then we fight. Humanity has returned, and we will not fail this time. The tremors grew louder as the mountain groaned under the weight of something above. Rocks cracked and dust rained from the ceiling of the tomb chamber. The Guardians shifted in unison, their weapons glowing brighter, their heavy feet pounding against the floor like a war drum. Commander Dan steadied himself and looked at his team. They're coming, he said in a firm tone. We need to hold this ground. Myra's tablet beeped again, her eyes wide as she studied the readings. Multiple ships. They've entered the atmosphere. They are heading straight for the volcano. Tomasz cursed under his breath, his hands gripping his scanner tightly. So the enemy survived. After all these centuries, they survived. The Guardians turned toward the entrance tunnels. Their metal bodies pulsed with light, as if they were awakening from a long sleep. The chamber filled with the sound of energy humming through their weapons. The once silent tomb now felt alive, ready for war. Dan raised his weapon, though he knew it was small compared to the machines around him. He was only a man, but he would not step back. He looked at Myra and Tomasz. Stay behind cover when the fight starts. Do not leave the Queen's side. She must be protected. Myra swallowed hard and nodded. Understood, Commander. The rumbling grew worse, and soon the sound of explosions echoed through the tunnels leading into the mountain. The enemy had arrived. From the darkness of the passage came a glow, not golden like the Guardians but harsh and red. Figures emerged, tall and twisted, their forms sharp and jagged like broken metal forged into bodies. Their eyes burned with crimson light. The enemy looked less like soldiers and more like living shadows wrapped in armor. One of them screeched, its voice echoing across the chamber like claws raking against stone. The sound made the walls shake. The Guardians answered. Their glowing eyes flared, and with heavy steps they advanced. The chamber shook as they unleashed beams of light from their weapons. The blasts cut through the enemy soldiers, burning holes into their dark bodies. The battle began. The enemy soldiers rushed forward in waves, their claws and weapons tearing into the guardians. The sound of metal striking metal filled the chamber as sparks flew. Some guardians fell, their stone-like armor shattering under the relentless assault, but for every guardian that fell, 2 more stepped forward. Dan moved quickly, firing his weapon at the enemy soldiers that tried to slip through the guardians' defense. His shots struck their bodies, slowing them but not destroying them. Still, he refused to stop. Each bullet, each strike, was his way of saying humanity would not bow. Tomasz joined in, using his scanner to overload some of the enemy's weapons. Sparks burst from their arms, leaving them vulnerable for the guardians to crush. His hands shook, but he kept working, his fear hidden beneath determination. Myra stayed near the queen's crystal tomb, her eyes scanning the carvings around the sarcophagus. Her mind worked fast as she translated. "Commander," she shouted over the noise, "the writings say she can be awakened if the enemy returns. She can lead the guardians again. But it requires a human to complete the ritual." Dan glanced back, his breath heavy. "And what does that mean?" Myra's hands trembled as she scrolled through the ancient words. "It means one of us has to give energy, life force, something strong enough to break her stasis. Without it, she'll stay asleep." The chamber shook as more enemy soldiers stormed inside. Dan fired again, forcing them back. "Then we do it? If she is the key, we cannot hold without her." The guardians fought bravely, but the waves of enemies kept coming. The red glow filled the chamber like fire, clashing with the golden light of the tomb's protectors. It was a battle of 2 legacies, one of hope, the other of destruction. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air. A massive figure entered through the tunnel, towering over the others. This one was not just a soldier, it was a commander of the enemy, its body covered in jagged armor that pulsed with red energy. Its voice thundered, echoing through the chamber as it pointed toward the queen's tomb. Even without translation, the meaning was clear. It wanted her destroyed. The enemy commander charged forward, swinging a massive blade of red light. Several guardians rushed to block it, but the strike shattered them in one swing. The force of the blow shook the entire chamber, knocking Myra to her knees. Dan ran to her side, pulling her up. "Stay behind me," he shouted. Myra's eyes were fixed on the tomb. "No, Commander. She must wake now. If we wait longer, the guardians will fall." Dan hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He fired one last shot at the enemy soldiers pressing close, then turned to the crystal sarcophagus. The queen's peaceful face stared back at him, her hands still crossed over her chest. Myra pressed her palm against the carvings near the base of the tomb. "Commander, place your hand here. The text says the tomb will only open to one who carries the blood of humanity." Dan did not question her. He pressed his hand against the mark. Warmth spread instantly, stronger than before, pulsing with power. The crystal tomb began to glow, golden lines spreading across its surface like cracks in ice. The enemy commander roared, realizing what was happening. It pushed through the guardians, raising its blade to strike. But before it could reach them, a burst of light exploded from the tomb, forcing everyone back. The crystal shattered, and from within, the alien queen rose. Her eyes opened, glowing with golden fire. Her armor shimmered as if reborn. She stepped onto the platform, raising one hand, and the guardians bowed instantly. The enemy soldiers froze for a brief moment, their red glow flickering. The queen's voice filled the chamber, strong and commanding, though none of them understood the words. Yet the meaning was clear. She had returned. With a sweep of her hand, the guardians surged forward with renewed strength. Their attacks doubled, their power amplified by her presence. The tide of battle shifted. The enemy commander roared again and swung its blade, but this time the queen met it with her own weapon, a golden spear that formed from pure light in her hand. The clash shook the entire tomb, Sparks flying as gold and red energy tore through the air. Dan shielded Myra and Tomasz as the shockwave passed over them. When he looked up, his eyes widened. The queen was fighting like a storm given shape, her movements fast and graceful, every strike filled with centuries of fury. Myra whispered, her eyes shining. She fights for us. For humanity. Dan tightened his grip on his weapon. Then we fight with her. Together, man and guardian stood with the queen as the enemy pressed harder. The tomb beneath the volcano had become a battlefield, one that would decide the future of both races. And as the queen's golden light clashed with the enemy's red fire, Dan realized one truth: this was not the end. This was only the beginning. The tomb shook as the battle raged. The golden queen stood tall, her spear glowing with bright light, facing the enemy commander whose blade burned with red fire. Around them, guardians and enemy soldiers clashed, their strikes echoing like thunder. Dust and sparks filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Commander Dan held his rifle tightly, standing shoulder to shoulder with Myra and Tomasz. They were small compared to the giants fighting around them, yet their presence mattered. Humanity had awakened the queen, and now they had a role to play in her war. The queen moved like a storm. Her golden spear clashed with the enemy commander's blade again and again. Each strike sent waves of energy rolling through the chamber. The guardians cheered in their strange metallic voices as they fought harder, inspired by her presence. But the enemy commander was powerful. Its strikes cut through guardians with ease, breaking them apart. Its soldiers poured into the chamber, wave after wave, their red eyes glowing with endless fury. Tomasz shouted over the noise. "We can't hold forever. There are too many of them." Myra's eyes scanned her tablet. She pointed to the carvings on the walls. "There's another way. The tomb is linked to the volcano itself. If the chamber is sealed, the enemy will be trapped inside. But we would be trapped too." Dan frowned as he fired another round. "What do we need to do?" Myra's hands shook as she traced the symbols. "The writings say the seal can be activated by both the queen and a human. It needs their bond, light and life together." Dan's jaw tightened. "Then we do it? If it's the only way to stop them, we don't have a choice." The queen turned, as if she understood their words even without language. Her golden eyes locked onto Dan's. She nodded once, then raised her hand toward the wall. The carvings lit up, glowing with golden fire. But the enemy commander noticed. With a roar, it rushed toward them, swinging its massive blade. The guardians tried to block it, but the force of its strikes knocked them aside. Dan raised his rifle and fired again and again, but the shots only slowed it. The commander pressed forward, determined to stop the queen and the humans before the seal could be activated. Myra screamed, "Commander, it's coming straight for you." Dan stood his ground. He aimed carefully, waiting for the right moment. When the enemy commander raised its blade high, Dan fired at its face. The bullet struck its red eye, making it roar in pain. It stumbled for a moment, giving the queen time to strike. Her golden spear pierced its chest, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The enemy commander staggered back, its body flickering with red cracks. But it was not defeated yet. With one last roar, it raised its blade and charged again. The queen looked at Dan and pointed toward the wall. The message was clear. "Activate the seal now." Dan ran to the wall, pressing his hand onto the glowing carvings. Heat spread through his body, almost burning, but he refused to move. The queen placed her hand beside his, her golden light mixing with his human strength. The chamber shook violently as the walls lit up. Streams of molten light ran through the cracks in the stone, connecting every corner of the tomb. The volcano itself seemed to awaken. The enemy commander roared in fury, striking down guardians and pushing forward. It raised its blade to stop them, but the queen moved faster. She blocked its strike with her spear, holding it back with all her strength. Sparks of red and gold filled the chamber as they pushed against each other. Dan gritted his teeth as the carvings burned hotter under his hand. "Almost there," he shouted. Myra and Tomasz stood by his side, defending him from enemy soldiers that tried to reach the wall. Tomasz overloaded his scanner again and again, sending bursts of energy that made the red soldiers collapse. Myra fired her pistol with steady hands, protecting her commander. The seal grew brighter. The walls of the tomb began to close, stone grinding against stone as the volcano's power awakened. Lava rumbled deep below, sending heat through the floor. The enemy commander howled, realizing what was happening. It swung wildly, trying to break free from the queen's hold. She pushed harder, her golden spear piercing deeper into its chest. With a final cry, she drove it back and impaled it against the floor. The red glow of its body flickered and then shattered into smoke. The soldiers froze. Without their commander, their red light dimmed. The seal's power spread across the chamber, pulling them into the cracks of the closing walls. One by one, the enemy soldiers were swallowed by the tomb, trapped forever inside the volcano. Dan felt his body grow weak, the carvings draining his strength. But he kept his hand pressed against the wall. The queen's golden light supported him, keeping him on his feet. Together, they finished the ritual. The final seal snapped into place. The chamber grew still. The red glow was gone. Only the soft golden light of the queen and the quiet hum of the guardians remained. Dan fell to his knees, exhausted. Myra and Tomasz rushed to his side. "Commander, are you all right?" Myra asked, her voice trembling. Dan nodded slowly. "Still alive. That's enough." The queen stepped forward, her golden armor glowing softly. She looked at Dan with eyes filled not with command but with gratitude. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture that carried the weight of a promise. The guardians stood silent, their glowing eyes fixed on the humans. They seemed to recognize them as allies now, not intruders. Myra looked around, her voice quiet. "We did it. The enemy is sealed. The tomb is safe again." Tomasz let out a shaky laugh. "Safe, but at what cost? We almost didn't make it." Dan stood slowly, leaning on his rifle. He looked at the queen. "This isn't just about the tomb, is it? They'll come again. Out there, beyond this world." This was only one battle. The queen met his gaze, her expression solemn. She raised her spear and pointed upward, toward the sky above the volcano. Her message was clear. The war was far from over. Dan turned to his team. "Then we prepare. Humanity won't be caught unready. Not again." The volcano rumbled softly, but now it felt different, not like a threat, but like a guardian watching over them. The tomb was no longer forgotten. It was alive, sealed with both human strength and alien power. The queen stepped closer to Dan. She placed her hand on his shoulder, her golden light warm against his skin. No words were spoken, but the meaning was clear. She had chosen him, and through him, humanity, as her allies. Myra and Tomasz exchanged glances, their fear replaced with hope. For centuries, the tomb had waited. Now it was awake. And as the first rays of dawn touched the volcano above, Commander Dan knew one truth: this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of something far greater. Humanity had stood beside the queen in her final stand, and together they would face whatever came next. The tomb was sealed. The enemy was gone. But the bond between human and alien had just begun.